Racist retail manager rejects Snoop Dogg, but what happened next shocked everyone. Snoop Dogg stepped through the gleaming glass doors of Beverly Luxe, one of the most exclusive retail stores in Beverly Hills. The store was quiet, pristine, filled with the soft hum of classical music and the faint scent of expensive leather and polished wood. Rows of designer clothes lined the walls, and luxury handbags sat on glass pedestals as if they were museum pieces rather than items for sale. Snoop wasn't in a hurry. He strolled in, his signature swagger in every step, wearing a gray hoodie, loose sweatpants, and a pair of crisp white sneakers. His chains gleamed under the store's lighting, each one swinging slightly with his movements. Despite the casual outfit, everything about him screamed confidence. But the moment he stepped inside, he felt it. The shift in energy. The employees behind the front desk stiffened, their polite smiles faltering just slightly. The security guard standing near the entrance subtly adjusted his stance, shifting his weight forward as if preparing to step in. A few customers turned their heads, eyes scanning him up and down, as if trying to place him. And then, a man in a tailored navy blue suit came striding toward him, moving with purpose. The manager. His name tag read Richard Davenport, and the artificial smile on his face didn't quite reach his eyes. He stopped just a few feet from Snoop, folding his hands in front of him in an overly formal way. "Can I help you?" Richard asked, his voice polite but with a noticeable edge, the way someone speaks when they assume they already know the answer. Snoop paused, adjusting his hoodie slightly. He recognized this energy immediately. He had felt it 100 times before, in places where people assumed they knew who belonged and who didn't. "Yeah," Snoop said smoothly, scanning the store. "I'm looking for a new jacket. Something nice." Richard hesitated, his lips pressing together for a split second before his smile returned. "Of course," he said, though there was something performative about it. "We carry only the highest-end designers here. Our clientele, well, they typically prefer a certain style." Snoop arched an eyebrow, catching the unspoken meaning behind those words. "Aight, that so?" He smirked, his voice light but his eyes sharp. "Well, let me see what y'all got then." Richard hesitated, then finally stepped aside. "Right this way," he said, but his tone was clipped, as if he was reluctant to entertain this request. As Snoop moved further inside, he could still feel the security guard's eyes trailing him. The tension in the air hadn't eased, it had only grown. He ignored it. Strolling past the displays, he took his time, occasionally picking up an item, feeling the material between his fingers, nodding slightly in approval. But every time he reached for something, an employee would appear. Like clockwork. "Sir, that item is part of our private collection, very exclusive. That particular jacket starts at $6,000, just so you're aware. Are you looking for something more affordable?" Snoop chuckled under his breath. It was almost comical how predictable this was. He had been in luxury stores all over the world, but there were always places like this, places where money wasn't enough, where status wasn't enough, where people thought they could look at a man and decide whether he belonged. He reached for a sleek designer coat, black with gold embroidery along the collar. Before he could even lift it off the rack, a hand shot out in front of him. Richard had stepped in again, his fingers gripping the hanger as if physically blocking the purchase. "I'm sorry," Richard said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But that particular piece is reserved for our VIP clientele." Snoop let the moment stretch, looking at Richard's hand, then at his face. "That right?" he said slowly. Richard didn't move. He didn't flinch. He had decided at this moment that this man in a hoodie and sneakers wasn't worth his time. Snoop exhaled through his nose. He had two choices: call this man out, make a scene, or let him dig his own grave. He chose the second. "Aight," Snoop said, taking a step back. "Guess I'll just look around then." Richard nodded, clearly satisfied that he had asserted control. "Of course. If you need assistance with anything, let me know." Snoop watched as Richard walked off, before glancing over his shoulder. The security guard was still watching him. Still waiting, like they expected him to steal something. He chuckled again, shaking his head. This was about to get interesting. Snoop took his time moving through the store, feeling the weight of every stare, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. He had been in situations like this before, where people sized him up the moment he walked through the door, making assumptions based on nothing but their own narrow perceptions. It was almost funny. Almost. He reached for another jacket, a smooth navy cashmere coat with sleek black buttons, but before his fingers could even brush against it, a young sales associate, her name tag read Clara, stepped in front of him, her hands clasped tightly together. "Sir, that's from our exclusive collection," she said, her voice strained, like she was forcing herself to stay polite. Snoop gave her a slow nod, studying her face. She looked nervous, glancing toward the store manager as if waiting for approval. "Exclusive, huh?" he said. "You mean expensive?" Clara hesitated, then gave an awkward laugh. "That coat is, quite rare." Snoop leaned back slightly, running his tongue over his teeth. He glanced toward the store entrance, where the security guard was still stationed, arms crossed, gaze locked onto him. They were waiting for him to get frustrated, waiting for him to react, waiting for him to do exactly what they expected him to do. Instead, he just chuckled under his breath and let go of the jacket. "Aight," he said smoothly. "Guess I'll leave it alone then." Clara let out a small breath of relief, stepping aside. Snoop wandered toward the shoe section, his hands in his pockets, nodding slightly to himself. The way they were acting, you'd think he had walked in here with a mask and a duffel bag, not millions in the bank. And still, not a single person had recognized him. He didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it this way, because when the tables turned, it was going to hit twice as hard. Richard, the manager, had been keeping his distance, but Snoop could feel the man's watchful gaze from across the store. He was standing near the register, speaking in hushed tones with another employee, occasionally casting glances in Snoop's direction. Then, as if coming to a decision, he straightened his suit, adjusted his tie, and walked toward him again. Snoop smirked to himself. "Here we go." Richard stopped just a few feet away, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice syrupy with forced politeness. "But I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Snoop tilted his head slightly, pretending not to hear him. "Come again." Richard exhaled through his nose, like he was dealing with a problem instead of a customer. "I'm afraid we have a policy regarding loitering." Snoop let out a slow, amused breath. "Loitering?" Richard nodded stiffly. "Yes. Our store has a certain standard and we typically cater to a different clientele." There was. Not even trying to hide it anymore. Snoop stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between them. Richard shifted on his feet. The store had gone quiet. A few customers were now watching from a distance, sensing the undeniable tension in the air. One woman whispered something to her friend, both of them glancing toward Snoop like they almost recognized him but weren't sure. Snoop turned his gaze toward the cash register, where a clerk had been secretly recording the interaction on her phone. This was about to be fun. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a quick call. "Yeah," he said, his voice casual, like he was ordering food instead of handling this nonsense. "Tell him I'm here." "I'll wait." Richard blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" Snoop didn't answer. He just smiled. Then, exactly 30 seconds later, the double doors at the back of the store swung open. A man in an expensive three-piece suit walked in, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. His eyes scanned the store before landing on Snoop and immediately lighting up. "Mr. Broaddus." The entire store went silent. Richard's face drained of color. The man, the store's regional director, rushed forward, his hands outstretched. "It's an honor to have you here, sir. I apologize, we weren't informed of your visit." Snoop grinned, watching as Richard practically shriveled into himself. "Oh, don't even worry about it," Snoop said, his voice smooth as ever. He gestured lazily toward Richard. "My man here was real helpful. Made sure I got the full experience." The regional director turned toward Richard, his expression darkening. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The store clerk who had been recording took a step back, clearly trying to suppress a knowing smile. Snoop took a slow step forward, enjoying the moment. "Now," he said, his tone light but unmistakably firm, Y'all got that jacket in my size, or nah? Richard swallowed hard. Richard stood frozen in place, his face pale as the regional director turned toward him, eyes narrowing. The entire store had gone silent, the tension so thick it felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Snoop stood there, cool and unbothered, watching the moment unfold like he was the director of a movie that Richard was just realizing he was the villain in. The regional director's gaze flicked between Snoop and Richard, trying to piece together what had happened before he arrived. But it didn't take much effort. The horrified look on Richard's face, the recording phone in the hands of the store clerk, and the whispers among the customers all pointed to one thing. A mistake had been made. A big mistake. Mr. Broadus, I sincerely apologize for any, the regional director started, but Snoop held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't even trip, Snoop said smoothly, glancing back toward the jacket Richard had blocked him from buying earlier. We good. Just wanted to see if y'all still got that in my size. Richard stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The realization that he had just humiliated one of the most famous men in the world was sinking in, and the regret was written all over his face. The regional director turned sharply to Richard, his tone clipped. Get him the jacket. No. Richard snapped into motion, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the luxury coat. He pulled it off the rack and turned toward Snoop, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a man handing over his own resignation letter. Snoop took the jacket, turning it over in his hands, inspecting the quality. Yeah, this one nice, he mused, trying it on as Richard stood there, humiliated. The fit was perfect. Of course it was. The regional director, desperate to salvage the situation, forced a smile. Anything else we can do for you, Mr. Broadus? We'd be happy to arrange. Snoop waved him off. Nah, I'm good, my guy. Just came through to do a little shopping. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of cash, enough to buy out half the store if he wanted to. How much? Richard flinched, probably realizing that if he had just done his job like a normal person, this sale could have been his commission. The store clerk, the same one who had been secretly recording, stepped forward instead. It's on us, sir, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but not with fear, with excitement. As an apology for your experience today. Snoop chuckled. Oh nah, sweetheart. I don't do free handouts. I pay for what I want. He handed her the stack of cash. Just make sure you get the commission, not him. He nodded toward Richard, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The clerk lit up, her cheeks flushing as she took the money. Why, sir? Of course. Richard's humiliation was complete. He had been written out of the sale, stripped of his authority, and exposed in front of customers, employees, and his boss. But Snoop wasn't done. He turned toward the regional director, adjusting the newly purchased designer jacket on his shoulders. Oh, and one more thing, he said, pausing. The director straightened. Yes? Snoop nodded toward Richard. Might want to have a talk with your boy here. About how he treats people. The weight of those words landed hard. The regional director's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We'll be handling that immediately. Snoop gave one last smirk, then turned, strolling toward the exit like he owned the place. And in a way, at that moment, he kinda did. As he reached the doors, the security guard, who had been watching him like a hawk earlier, quickly stepped aside, clearing his path. Snoop stopped for just a second, looking the man up and down before flashing a grin. Bet y'all won't make that mistake again. And then he walked out. The moment the doors swung shut behind him, the tension inside the store snapped like a rubber band. The whispers turned into full conversations. The store clerk checked the cash in her hands, probably realizing that she had just made the biggest sale of her career. The regional director turned on Richard with a look that promised consequences. And Richard? Richard just stood there, watching the door Snoop had walked out of, his career crumbling around him. Because this wasn't just a mistake. This was the kind of mistake that went viral. The moment Snoop Dogg stepped out of Beverly Lux, he could feel the energy shift behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know that the store had erupted into chaos. Whispers, gasps, and hushed conversations spreading like wildfire. He could practically hear the manager's career crumbling in real time. But he wasn't concerned about that. With his new designer jacket resting perfectly on his shoulders, he pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and brought it up to his ear. "Yeah, it's me," he said smoothly as he strolled toward his car. "Y'all ain't gonna believe what just happened." Inside the store, Richard was unraveling. The regional director was staring at him, arms crossed, his jaw set tight with barely restrained rage. The store employees had all gathered near the register, whispering among themselves, throwing Richard glances that ranged from smug satisfaction to outright pity. But the worst part? The customers. Some were still lingering, whispering, chuckling, shaking their heads at the ridiculous spectacle they had just witnessed. And then there was the store clerk who had recorded the entire thing. She was now re-watching the footage, a small smirk on her lips. Richard felt the world closing in around him. "Sir," the regional director finally spoke, his voice ice cold, "would you care to explain what the hell just happened?" Richard opened his mouth, but for the first time in his life, he had no excuses. No way to spin this. No way to talk his way out of it. He had treated Snoop Dogg like a criminal, humiliated him in front of customers, tried to kick him out of a store he had every right to shop in, and now? Now, he had just lost a massive sale. And worse, he had insulted one of the most famous men in the world. "Sir, Richard stammered, his face pale. The regional director held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want excuses. I don't want explanations. I want you in my office. Now." The entire staff watched in silence as Richard walked toward the back, his shoulders slumped, his career practically dead in the water. The moment he disappeared, the store erupted. Did that really just happen? That was Snoop Dogg. He was just shopping in. "Yo, I hope that dude gets fired. That was messed up." The clerk who had recorded everything? She hit upload. Snoop Dogg didn't need to blast the store online. He didn't even need to say a word. Because within hours, the video had already begun going viral. The footage spread like wildfire. The moment Richard had blocked Snoop from shopping, the fake politeness, the condescension, the outright racial profiling, and finally, the moment when the regional director walked in and everything fell apart. Social media ate it up. Imagine working in Beverly Hills and not recognizing Snoop Dogg. That's crazy. I hope dude enjoyed his last day as store manager. This is why people don't like shopping at luxury stores. They think they can decide who belongs. And then, the worst thing possible for Richard happened. Celebrities started chiming in. Famous athletes, musicians, actors, people who had all experienced some form of racial profiling in high-end spaces, retweeted the video, sharing their own stories. And then, the CEO of the store chain made a public statement. "This behavior does not reflect the values of our company. The employee in question has been placed on immediate leave pending investigation." Translation? Richard was fired before he even had a chance to explain himself. Days later, Snoop Dogg was back in Beverly Hills, this time at a different store. A competitor of Beverly Lux. The owner of this store had personally invited him in, promising VIP treatment, giving him access to their rarest, most expensive collections. As Snoop walked inside, he could feel the difference immediately. No stares. No security trailing him. No fake smiles or condescending tones. Just respect. He picked out a few things, dropped stupid amounts of cash, and before leaving, posed for a photo with the staff, flashing a peace sign as he grinned. That photo? It went viral to, "This is how you treat customers. Take notes." Meanwhile, Beverly Lux was still trending, for all the wrong reasons. Sales plummeted. People boycotted. And Richard? Richard wasn't managing anything anymore. Snoop sat in his car later that night, leaning back in his seat, his new designer coat still crisp, still fresh. He laughed to himself, shaking his head. All that over a jacket. "Nah," he muttered, adjusting his sunglasses. It was never about the jacket. It was about respect. And today, he had made sure they would never forget his name. Not now. Not ever. The fallout from the viral video was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, Beverly Lux was in full damage control mode. Their PR team scrambled to put out statements, the CEO made a second apology, and their social media pages were flooded with angry comments. But the internet wasn't buying it. People weren't just mad, they were furious. Luxury brands had always had a reputation for being elitist, but this was different. This wasn't just snobbery. This was profiling. This was straight-up discrimination. And with every celebrity, influencer, and public figure who reposted the clip, the backlash only grew bigger. Crazy how they saw Snoop Dogg and thought, nah, this guy can't afford it? Imagine throwing away your entire career over being racist in public. Some of y'all really think wealth has a look, huh? The hashtags #BoycottBeverlyLux and #RespectYourCustomers trended for days. And then came the real hit. A well-known hip-hop mogul, someone who had major investments in luxury fashion, announced that he was pulling his partnerships from Beverly Lux. That meant millions of dollars lost. And that was the moment Beverly Lux realized this wasn't just bad PR. This was a business disaster. Meanwhile, Richard's life was falling apart. After the store placed him on administrative leave, he tried to lay low, hoping that the outrage would die down. It didn't. Strangers flooded his social media, calling him out. People dug up old Yelp reviews of Beverly Lux, pointing out past complaints about racial profiling. And when the company finally officially fired him to protect the integrity of their brand, Richard realized he had nowhere to go. No other luxury store wanted to hire the guy who got exposed for kicking out Snoop Dogg. And worse, his own friends stopped answering his calls. The very same people who laughed at his high standards before, now they were avoiding him like a plague. Snoop, on the other hand, he wasn't worried about Beverly Lux. They had already done the damage to themselves. Instead, he was too busy making power moves. A few days after the video reached over 50 million views, Snoop got a call from a major luxury designer, someone who wanted to work with him directly. They weren't just offering him a custom wardrobe. They were talking collaboration. They wanted to partner with him to create a new, exclusive fashion line. And the best part? That line would be designed for everyone, not just the elite few. Snoop agreed immediately. If there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was this: money doesn't make you classy. Respect does. And right now, he was about to teach the industry a lesson. The announcement came 1 week later. Snoop Dogg was officially launching his own luxury brand. And in the press release, one quote stood out more than anything else. "We ain't excluding nobody. Because real style doesn't come with a price tag, it comes with respect." The internet exploded. People rushed to support it, celebrities backed the project, and Beverly Lux? They were officially irrelevant. Their name? Permanently tied to one of the biggest retail disasters in history. And as for Richard? Well, let's just say he wasn't working in luxury fashion anymore. Last anyone checked, he was managing a struggling outlet store on the outskirts of town. And every once in a while, someone would recognize him. "Hey, aren't you that guy from the Snoop Dogg video?" Yeah, he was. And he always would be. Snoop never went back to Beverly Lux. He didn't need to. They had already learned the hard way. Some doors only open for those who show respect. And they had slammed theirs shut on the wrong man. Snoop Dogg never needed to say another word about Beverly Lux. Their downfall had already been set in motion, and no amount of corporate PR spin could undo the damage. While they scrambled to salvage their reputation, Snoop was already 10 steps ahead, focused on something bigger. The launch of his luxury fashion brand was a massive success. It wasn't just about high-end clothing, it was about changing the culture of fashion. He wasn't selling exclusivity. He was selling style, attitude, and respect. And everyone, from high-profile celebrities to everyday fans, wanted in. But the real power move? He strategically placed flagship stores in areas where people had been historically excluded from luxury shopping. Harlem, South Central, Detroit, Atlanta. Places where fashion had always existed, but the industry had refused to recognize it. Snoop was rewriting the rules. And the numbers? They spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, at what was left of Beverly Lux, the store had become a ghost town. The once thriving location, where celebrities used to shop and tourists used to line up just to say they had been there, was now practically empty. The fallout from the scandal hadn't just ruined their reputation, it had destroyed their profits. Customers stopped coming. Brands stopped collaborating. Their biggest investors pulled out. And just a few months later, the store shut down. Permanently. A huge "For Lease" sign now hung where the luxury storefront used to be. Ironically, that same clerk who had recorded everything ended up working for another high-end retailer, one that didn't discriminate against customers. And as for Richard, he had vanished from the fashion industry entirely. The last anyone had heard, he was working a desk job at a corporate office in a city no one cared about. No authority, no prestige, no second chances. A fitting end for a man who had once thought he could decide who was worthy and who wasn't. Snoop's final move. A year after the incident, Snoop was invited to a major industry gala in Beverly Hills. The kind of event where fashion moguls, billionaires, and designers all gathered to celebrate themselves. Snoop wasn't just attending. He was being honored. His brand had shattered records, changed the industry, and proven that style wasn't about price. It was about presence. As he walked into the grand ballroom, dressed in one of his own custom designs, people stared. Not in the way they had in Beverly Lux. No suspicion. No profiling. No judgment. Just respect. Because now, Snoop Dogg wasn't just a legend in music. He was a king in fashion too. And the lesson he had left behind? The industry would never forget it. The echoes of Beverly Lux's failure rippled far beyond its empty storefront. It became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how quickly arrogance could bring down even the most seemingly untouchable institutions. The fashion industry had learned a hard lesson, and Snoop Dogg? He wasn't just moving forward, he was thriving. His luxury brand, once just an idea, had evolved into a global phenomenon. What had started as a single flagship store had expanded into a full-fledged empire, with locations in Paris, Tokyo, London, and Dubai. Celebrities, athletes, even former fashion gatekeepers, everyone wanted a piece of it. But the best part? His stores had no VIP section. No by-appointment-only policy. If you had style, confidence, and appreciation for the craft, you belonged. And that was what made it powerful. Because Snoop hadn't just built a fashion empire, he had built a cultural movement. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the industry, Richard remained forgotten. No high-profile job offers. No second chances. No way back in. His name had become a whisper in closed rooms, a joke among executives who had scrubbed any affiliation with him from their companies. Every time he tried to re-enter the world of luxury retail, doors slammed shut in his face. And every rejection echoed the same silent message. We saw what you did. We know who you are. And there's no place for you here anymore. It was ironic, really. Once upon a time, he had tried to decide who belonged and who didn't. But he was the one locked out. 1 year later, Snoop was preparing for his biggest launch yet, a special anniversary collection to celebrate 1 year since his brand had debuted. The anticipation was off the charts. Magazines, influencers, designers, everyone was talking about it. And the location? It was set to be a secret, revealed only on the night of the event. When the details finally dropped, social media exploded. Because Snoop had chosen the most poetic venue possible. The old Beverly Lux store. Or rather, what used to be Beverly Lux. Now it was his. After their bankruptcy, the building had been purchased by a private investor. And that investor? Snoop Dogg. He had waited for the right moment. And now? He was about to turn the site of his past humiliation into the birthplace of his greatest triumph. The night of the launch. A long line stretched down Rodeo Drive, fans, press, and industry elites all waiting for the doors to open. The energy was electric. Cameras flashed. Journalists whispered. Every big name in fashion was inside, waiting for the unveiling. And when Snoop finally stepped onto the stage, dressed in one of his own signature designs, the room erupted. He let the applause roll over him, taking a slow breath before speaking into the mic. A year ago, I walked into this building and they told me I didn't belong. The crowd murmured. Some had seen the video. Some had only heard the story. But they all knew what he was talking about. But y'all know me, Snoop continued, flashing a slow grin. I don't hold grudges. I just make moves. He gestured to the space around him. So I bought the place. The room exploded. laughter, cheers. The sheer petty brilliance of the move sent waves through the industry. But Snoop wasn't done. "This ain't just a store," he said, letting his words settle. "It's a reminder that respect matters. That no matter how much money you got, how big your brand is, you ain't nothing if you don't know how to treat people right." A beat of silence. Then a standing ovation. This wasn't just a launch. This was history. And as Snoop looked out at the sea of faces, celebrities, designers, young fans who had grown up looking up to him, he knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just won the battle. He had changed the game forever. Snoop's power move, turning the very store that rejected him into his own empire, sent shockwaves through the industry. Luxury fashion houses, high-end retailers, and even major CEOs suddenly found themselves in damage control mode. They saw what had happened to Beverly Lux. They saw how one mistake, one arrogant assumption, one moment of prejudice had destroyed a business overnight. And they weren't about to let that happen to them. Suddenly, policies were changing. Retail chains scrambled to retrain their staff, introducing anti-discrimination policies and enforcing new protocols to avoid another PR disaster. Some of it was performative, companies desperate to save face. But some of it was real. Because if Snoop Dogg could expose an entire industry with one viral moment, then who was to say it wouldn't happen to them next? Meanwhile, Richard's fall from grace hit rock bottom. The luxury fashion industry had officially blacklisted him. No major retailer wanted to hire the guy whose face was associated with one of the biggest PR disasters in retail history. Every interview ended the same way. "We're looking for someone with a stronger reputation in customer relations. Unfortunately, we've already filled the position." And then, finally, someone just said it outright. "You're too much of a liability." That one word haunted him. Liability. He had spent his whole career believing that he was the gatekeeper, that he was the one who decided who deserved access and who didn't. But now he was the one locked out. The inevitable job offer? A humiliating twist. With no options left, Richard was forced to take a job at a mid-tier retail chain, one of those discount luxury outlets that sold old-season designer goods at half the price. It was a far cry from Beverly Hills. No exclusive clientele. No high-end treatment. No VIP-only sections. Just regular people, shopping without judgment. And worst of all, he had to assist customers who looked just like the ones he used to turn away. The first time it happened, he felt a sharp pang of irony. A young black man, dressed in casual streetwear, walked into the store and started browsing. Richard felt that old instinct, the urge to assess, to judge, to assume. But this time he knew better. Because he needed this job. So he walked over, forced a smile, and asked, "Can I help you find something today?" The man looked at him, then smirked. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Richard blinked. Should I? The customer pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then held it up for Richard to see. It was a video. The one where Richard had blocked Snoop Dogg from shopping. The humiliation hit like a truck. "You're that guy," the customer said, shaking his head. "How's that working out for you?" Richard had no words. He just stood there, staring at the screen, his own past playing back in front of him. The customer just chuckled, put his phone away, and walked past him like he didn't even exist. And at that moment, Richard realized something. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible. Snoop's next big move, elevating the culture. While Richard was fading into irrelevance, Snoop's empire was expanding at an insane pace. His new luxury brand had already dominated the fashion industry, but he wasn't done yet. He didn't just want to sell high-end fashion. He wanted to change the entire system. So he took things one step further. He launched a mentorship program, a platform for aspiring Black designers, creatives, and entrepreneurs who had been shut out of the industry. No more gatekeeping. No more closed doors. No more Beverly Lux nonsense. If you had talent, if you had vision, if you had the drive, you were in. And just like that, he wasn't just making money. He was making history. The cultural shift, the impact on everyday people. It didn't take long for people to notice the difference. Shopping experiences started changing. Luxury stores began treating every customer like they mattered because they had seen what happened when they didn't. More diverse designers were finally getting the recognition they deserved. And most importantly, people realized that fashion wasn't just for the elite. Style wasn't about the price tag. It was about the person wearing it. The moment that brought it full circle. One night, months after his empire had reached its peak, Snoop sat in a private VIP lounge at an exclusive event in Paris. Celebrities, designers, musicians, all the biggest names in the world were there. He was relaxed, chilling, sipping a drink when someone hesitantly approached. Snoop glanced up. It was Richard, the former manager of Beverly Lux, looking older, worn down, dressed in an ill-fitted suit that wasn't even designer. Snoop smirked. They let you in here? Richard swallowed hard. I just wanted to say, I was wrong. Snoop leaned back, studying him. You saying that 'cause you mean it, or 'cause you got nowhere else to go? Richard hesitated. Both. The honesty caught Snoop off guard. For a brief moment, there was silence between them. Then Snoop exhaled. Let this be a lesson, dog. You ain't gotta be rich to have class. You just gotta know how to treat people. Richard nodded, not even trying to argue. Snoop lifted his glass. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got people to celebrate with. And just like that, Richard was dismissed. Not with malice. Not with anger. Just indifference. And that was worse than anything else. Because he was nothing now. And Snoop? Snoop was everything. Final words, the legacy of this moment. When history looks back on this story, they won't remember Richard. They won't remember Beverly Lux. They won't remember the store that thought it was too good for certain people. What they'll remember is how one man turned rejection into an empire. How one viral moment changed an industry. How one mistake exposed a system that needed to be broken. And how, through it all, Snoop Dogg came out on top. Not just as a legend in music. Not just as a mogul in fashion. But as a symbol of what happens when the world tries to close a door on the wrong person. Because some people, they don't just walk away. They own the whole damn building.